Now, the Iraqi government have passed a law which opponents say will effectively allow marriage involving children as young as 9. The UK has one of the largest, if not the largest, Iraqi community in the Western world, with an estimated 150,000 living here in London. And there are concerns this could impact some of them. One Iraqi Kurd survivor of child marriage has been telling our senior reporter Helen Drew her story.
Paisy Mahmood was forced into marriage by her parents at the age of 16 to a much older man, and it happened in London.
When I think back to my own wedding party, there were hundreds of people there and many adults. And, you know, people from my community are educated. You have teachers, you have doctors, you know, people who know this is wrong. People can see when someone like me, when I look at my wedding pictures, you can see I am literally a child.
Ultimately, how did this part of the story end for you?
I think, if I'm being honest, to say this ended isn't really truthful. I think it carries lifelong, you know, harm, that even though I've moved on, you know, I'm not married anymore, I have a beautiful son, it's still with me. And even having this conversation with you today, I revisit myself as a child who essentially lost my childhood to child marriage.
But her sister Banaz lost a lot more. She was murdered by members of her family and community after she left her own child marriage.
I always say this because it's so ironic that my sister lost her life because she wanted a life. You know, she fought for her right to live. Yeah, so it's hard to put into words. It's all these years on. It's almost 20 years. It's really hard to process. Obviously, I'm talking about it. I know it's real, but it's so hard to accept.
The sisters, both married in London, allowed at the time with parental consent. 2 years ago, England and Wales raised the legal age for all forms of marriage from 16 to 18. But in their home country of Iraq, the government recently passed a law giving religious authorities the power to decide on family affairs, which critics say will in effect allow for girls as young as 9 to be married, depending on their religion. The former Director of Public Prosecutions for England and Wales says it could have implications for Iraqis living in London.
When I was the Director of Public Prosecutions, we had a number of cases of what I would call child kidnap, in which young children, boys and girls, perhaps at the end of a marriage or relationship, would be forcibly taken to countries of origin of their parents. Here we're talking about Iraq. And on return to Iraq, the risk is already that young children will be subjected to forced marriage. And under the laws that the Iraqi courts or the Iraqi government have now imposed, an indirect impact could be subjected to forced marriage at an increasingly young age.
The Foreign Office told us the UK continues to assess the implications for women and children's rights following the amendments passed by the Iraqi Parliament. They say they've long emphasised the importance of any legislative change to be compatible with Iraq's international obligations.
I'm really heartbroken. It just kills me inside to think this is the value of girls' lives. And their only crime is being a girl, being born a girl.
There are concerns that when a country makes a decision like this, it's felt worldwide.
Well, joining us now is Samat Gornal from the Avengers, a UK-based charity committed to ending all forms of violence against women. Samat, good to have you on the programme again. What are your thoughts about how this change in the law in Iraq could impact potentially on girls here in London?
Well, it's already an issue that affects Iraqi communities. We have one of the largest populations in Western world, as you know, and I'm also an advisor to forced marriage unit. And we've seen an interesting fact that over 20% of the forced marriages that had already begun being subjected on people, the people who were being subjected to forced marriage, their mental capacity was in question. And disproportionately, it also affected girl children. So this is an issue that affects girl children and vulnerable adults disproportionately. And although it was illegal in Iraq, with the personal status law since 1959, way before the UK, because we just made it illegal a few years ago, it was already at 28% known, the forced marriage facts. So when this is made legal, obviously this will have a knock-on effect. In the next decade, we could expect over 50% of women aged 20 to 25 having their forced marriage started in their child age. And then that will also have a knock-on effect in the communities here, because the overseas behaviours very much impact the diaspora communities here, sadly.
So what could be done to protect girls here from the Iraqi community?
Well, the forced marriage protection orders are incredibly effective, and I think people need to know that children themselves who are facing, risk of forced marriage, the family members or a relevant third party with a court, permission can actually go ahead and file these forced marriage protection orders. We've seen that being incredibly impactful in the first successful landmark conspiracy case that we had, which was FGM and child marriage of an Iraqi child who was trafficked. And I must emphasize, this is a form of modern slavery. So we cannot sit back and just watch. So if you're a teacher, member of a community, a neighbour, you have these legal rights. And as diaspora communities, and I must say I'm also a Middle Eastern diaspora community, we must rely on our good legislations that we have in the UK.
How prevalent do you think it is, children in the Iraqi community being forced into underage marriages?
Well, like I said, the known data that we know of based on the Iraqi data is 28 in Iraq. That's the known numbers. So every other second globally, a child is subjected to forced marriage. I just want to leave you with that. So by the time we finish this conversation, in about 60 minutes, so 60 seconds, there'll be 23 children forced to marriage. When you look at that global data, obviously London is a very diverse community. Surely you can see how vast it is in our local community here as well. It's a massive issue with known over 640 million women and girls alive today have been subjected to forced marriage during their childhood. And that includes my mother, that includes everyone in my generation. I'm the first generation person not to have been subjected to child marriage. So there is hope. And I think we're also robbing children of their educational rights, their career choices. And it is legalized sexual assault. It's pedophilia. It has no place in our society or in any society globally.
OK. Clearly shocking statistics there from Sema.
We have to be honest, don't we, that no, there hasn't been enough violence against women and girls, which is the core of this issue. This is one terrible manifestation of that, but there are so many manifestations we've seen. We mentioned the Sarah Everard case in the previous discussion. That issue about violence against women and girls is far too prevalent in London. And
you to draw the equivalence to human trafficking, which of course it is. It absolutely is.
It is kidnapping, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And there are laws in place to prevent trafficking, but it's seeing it as trafficking that may be the problem. You point to hope. I notice there is an increase in number of recognition of children that are at risk in the UK, but I in London, I think there needs to be more work done. But I know that the Met Police are particularly alert to these cases of human trafficking, and it's something. I always say that you're never more than a couple of 100 yards away from a person who's been trafficked in London.
I heard Poised in that report talking about her and her sister who were forced into child marriages. She was just 16 and being forced to marry a much older man. And she spoke about the fact that at her wedding there were older, educated people who didn't stop it. What needs to happen within communities to make sure that these conversations are had?
I think the power of language goes a long way. So, like in her instance, even the last case I've mentioned, it was a PhD student who wanted to cut her child, subject her to FGM and force into marriage, a PhD student in Nottingham. When you're in a child marriage, you do not have access to your education. You often lose access to your future, your money, everything. So if we want to halve, and I would recommend to the government actually, we must have surveys